Hi, it's Chris from Epix Systems again. One of the questions that we get asked fairly regularly from our customers is how can we import assets into the system in bulk? Usually this follows a spreadsheet that you may have received from your client containing many properties or assets, and you'd like to be able to put those onto the system so that you can log jobs for them in the future. So rather than doing that one by one, there is an asset importer, and this is a short video explaining how to get a file ready to import into the database and how to use the asset importer. So this video does very much assume that you have already got a client and a branch in the system and also contracts set up for the customer that you're doing this asset import for. For details on how to set up a new client and use the client wizard, please see our other video on that. This one is solely for importing assets. We begin the process by stepping into the client wizard, and the way I do this is by going to create a job, and then we enter the customer name for who we're doing the asset import for, and then once we've selected it, next to the asset field, which could be captioned something different in your system, maybe property or something similar, we press the plus button here, and this steps us into the client wizard. And at the top of that page you can see that we're now in the client wizard at the asset screen, and over here we've got two buttons that we need to be concerned with. The yellow one here for download details will download the asset details for this client, so any assets or properties that exist in the system at the moment, this button will download all of those into a CSV file. And then the download template button will do a very similar thing in that it will download the asset import template, but without any of the property details. So these two buttons really would be used to download templates that would be useful for different tasks. So the yellow download details button would download all assets for this particular customer, and that would enable you to then make changes to those assets from within the spreadsheet that's downloaded, and you could then re-upload that to update the database. So for example, if you wanted to change the contact details or telephone numbers of all of the properties, you could do that by downloading the details and then re-uploading them. The download template button, just as I said earlier, does simply just download a template, so you could use that to add new addresses to this client. So we'll begin by pressing on the download details button, and what this does is it downloads a CSV file of all properties that exist for this client. So of course we could click on this right now and open the file directly, but a word of warning on that before you do, bearing in mind that spreadsheet programs, when you do click on them and open them without doing anything particular to the file, it can end up stripping leading zeros off your data. So an example of that would be a telephone number beginning with 07. The spreadsheet programs, when they open those sorts of files, it will interpret that data as a number, and so the 0 will disappear and you'll end up with a number beginning with 7. That can be a real problem with your asset references. So if you've got a unique property reference number that perhaps begins with a 0, when you download it from our system and then open it in a spreadsheet, what could happen is that the 0 goes away, and when you try and re-upload that data to make changes to the system, you end up creating another asset under a different reference that doesn't have a 0 in front of it. I'll do a separate video on how to open a spreadsheet file and not do that, but for now what we'll do is we'll just simply open it as normal, and you can see how the whole process works. So as we can see down here on the bottom corner of the screen, we've got a CSV file downloaded. If we click on that to open it, it'll open in your default spreadsheet program. So as we can see, what we have here is a spreadsheet file, and it's loaded up in CSV format, so there's no formatting involved at all. So across the top here we have our headings, and then from row 2 downwards all the data that relates to that site. And as we scroll over, we can see that the fields all exist across the side of the page there. Some of these are optional fields. We're not going to go into all of them right now, but I'm just going to cover off the key ones that you need to be able to do the task that you will be doing. So to make this easier, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make these a little larger so we can see the data that's within. So first column here in column A, the client alpha, This is the client reference for the client record in our system. Now often this is also the same reference that you use within your financial account system. So I'll just quickly zip over back to the system to show you where that is. And likewise the client branch alpha is the same thing. So I'll just go back into our system now and show you where to find this information for the client. So back in our system, in the client wizard here, one of the best things to do is to click back to the client stage of this wizard. So if we click in there, we can see here that the reference field, that's our client reference. Going back through the wizard to the client branch stage, then the reference for the branch for the property that you're amending or looking at in the file, that's here. So again, back over into our file, we should be able to see that we've got the different references here, but also the one from here shown in the first two columns of our spreadsheet. So here we can see the different references that exist. We can ignore this. This column is often used for external systems, perhaps if you're interfacing and there's an additional reference. Ignore that for now, you shouldn't need that for most of the tasks that you do with this. Obviously, if it is already filled in when you download the file from your system, then you could make changes to it, but I would be very careful because sometimes those references are required for interfacing. The alpha column is the reference for the property. Now this may be a unique property reference number. It could be a reference number that the client has provided for the assets, or it could well be a system generated one from with our system, which may be prefixed with a CRN or perhaps even the letters EP. Don't change these, because what happens when you try and re-upload the file, we match on the client, the branch and the asset references. So if you were to modify this, it will be looking for whatever you change it to in our system. So if you're downloading this file to amend any data, leave this column well alone. The asset field here, this is often used to describe the site or the asset. So sometimes it can simply say the word site, it could say detached, it could say it's an estate. If you've got a particular property, it could well be a bungalow or a whatever. We use it to describe the address. The address column is very simply the address for the site, as is the postcode. And if you are using region within your system to help differentiate work, say by area, then the region that's used could also be used to identify against that property as well, and that would be here. A lot of our customers don't use region, but if you do, you can update this field from within the importer file as well. So all the fields that exist now after here are a list of optional ones, and then towards the end we also get a couple of mandatory ones again. So things like access, the boiler make, attending in pairs and so on, all these fields that you can see me highlighting as I scroll over, these are all defined as site details within our system. So just to explain what those are, if I go back into our system again and I'll show you where these come from. So when you're logging a job here, clicking on the site details button, which is this icon here, that takes you into a screen where you can edit all this additional information about a site. So all these fields that are shown here, these are all fields that exist within that spreadsheet file that you can then add data to. So if you wanted to update, say for example you were doing a heating contract and you wanted to update the make and model etc. for your boilers that you're having fitted in these properties, then you could do this in bulk using the spreadsheet file. So as you can see, the fields that you can see across the top of the screen there, those match up with the ones that you've just seen in the back office system. Towards the far side over here, we do have some key fields that exist for all assets and are not optional, and these are to do with the contact details at the site and the contracts that exist for the work. So we'll begin with contact. The contact and the telephone number and fax and email, these ones here are all relating to the contact details for anybody at the premises or the asset. So this could be a tenant, it could be a homeowner. That's their name, That's obviously their telephone number, and email and fax that relate to the tenant or the resident. And also if there are any notes about them that exist, you could put those here. The contract alpha, this is where you can specify what contracts you want to be available to this asset when you're creating jobs. So as you know, when you create a job, if you are going to be doing, say, reactive works and planned works at a particular site, but not void works, then you would link the asset to the reactive and planned contracts and not bother with the voids. Well, you can specify this here, and you would use the alpha for the contract, and that's the contract reference from within our system. So I'll go back to the system again and show you where you can find that, and then show you what you would need to put in here to make that link between the asset and the contract. The easiest way of finding the contract references is to click into the plus button next to the contract field on the job entry screen, and the associated contracts that you see here, these are the references, this column here. So that is your contract alpha. So if you wanted to make the properties that you're about to upload now part of the manufacturing fault coast contract, then the reference you would require is this one here. Likewise, if you wanted to put the building faults in there, you would also use that code. So I'm going to make a note of those, and then I'm going to go back to our spreadsheet. So back in our spreadsheet, if we type into there the contract reference and then a semicolon and then a second contract reference, that will then make sure that that asset is linked to those two contracts. So very simply, we separate the references that we want to link the asset to with a semicolon. So assuming we wanted to do that one for all of the assets in this list now, we would just pull that down to the bottom of the page for as many assets as we have. I'm also going to, for the sake of this demonstration now, add a contact detail in here of Mr. Smith with a telephone number made up there. And as we can see, being a spreadsheet, it's decided to do a removal of a leading zero, so I'm going to add one back in using the apostrophe there. So I've now added Mr. Smith as the contact, and I'm going to do the same for all of the assets in the list. I'm just going to very quickly make sure that we haven't overrun, which we have, so I'm going to go down and remove those. So what we have now for each of the assets that are listed here, we have a contact and a telephone number and a contract linked to two contracts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this now to my desktop. I would always recommend saving this somewhere very useful, and I'm going to call it asset import. And then I'm going to go back to our system to upload the file. So back on the screen that we began, where we downloaded the details originally, a little further down the page is a choose file button. So when we press on that and browse for the file that we saved, and press open, and then we link to the two contracts that we wanted here. If we scroll down and then press the add button here at the bottom, up at the top here we can see that the file was imported successfully. That means we managed to upload the asset list, and any changes that we made or any additions that we did, those should all take place in the system now. So if we begin a new job again, as if we're going to create a job for a asset that we know we just updated, if I press on there now, as we can see, the contact name of Mr. Smith and the telephone number has now appeared. So the update that I did was successful. Now of course that was an update to an existing list. If we wanted to add, say, some properties to that client rather than updating ones that were already there, then the way I would do it was to be just basically reproduce what you've just done. So we would go back to the file that we had and then add things to that file. or you could even take the file of details that you know works and then remove some of the data from it and replace it with the new assets. That way you know you're going to get your references right. So let's go back to the file that we just used, and then within this file we will take some of the references that we need and add some new things. So let's say we want to add some things to the Northwest division, and the asset reference is going to be NW12345 for this first one, and it's going to be a detached, and it's at number 1 Hill Road, and the postcode SK12AB, and in the region, let's call this region the Northwest. And what we would do if we wanted to add in, say, numbers 1 to 40 on Hill Road, I would just simply copy this data down. So if I was to pull that down, as you can see, it's copied that down there to number 40. I would then copy my data here, and I'd do the same for the asset type if they were all detached houses, obviously. And the property reference number, again, what we could do here is we could just, they may well be supplied by your client, but for the purposes of this demo I'm just going to pull this down to increment each one by 1. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste the client reference that I want to put under client branch. And now I'm done with this information here. I don't want to re-upload any of this, so I'm going to delete that, leaving me with just my brand new file, but I know that these are all correct. And then finally, over on the other side here, the contract field, I'm going to link them all to the fault C contract, and I'm going to have a contact detail of to be confirmed, because we don't know any contact details for this customer just yet. So I'm going to pull that information down for all 40 sites, and then I'm going to save this file as something different. So I call it Hill Road, and press save. So then back into our system, we'll then import this file in the same way we just did for the previous attempt when we added some changes to the sites. So stepping back into the client wizard again, down here at the bottom we choose our file, and this time we're going to go with Hill Road, the fault C contract, and then we're going to press add. And as we can see at the top there, the file has imported successfully. So now when we go back to creating a simple job again, we should be able to do a search for number 1 Hill Road, which has then picked up on the fact that it's this client on the Northwest branch, but also that we've only linked to the 1 contract. So that asset import has been successful and the new assets have been created. So just to recap, to access the client wizard to enable you to undertake this task, you need to firstly enter your client name here, and then next to the asset field press the plus button. Downloading details at the top here will download any existing asset details for the client, where you can then change them or indeed make additions to the bottom of the list, so you could do both tasks in the same file. You would save that file, then once you've saved it and you're happy, you would use this button here to browse for the file that you have just saved and then upload it by confirming the contracts here and then pressing add here. And it's as simple as that. As always, any questions about anything you've seen, or if you want any help with how to manipulate an Excel file, then do give us a shout. We may be able to help you with that as well.